A seemingly ordinary morning at the house where Tieu Uyen lived unfolded with a chillingly eerie scene. Uyen's small house was sealed off. Inside, everything was in disarray, as if it had just weathered a storm. The wardrobe had been ripped open, drawers had been ransacked, all valuables were gone. The air was thick with the smell of wood dust and the lingering unease of the break-in. The police had arrived early. A young officer reported this might be a premeditated robbery, as there were no valuables left in the house. The perpetrator had left the scene. The crime scene had been cleared and was being prepared for sealing to continue the investigation. But what made everyone uneasy was that Uyen wasn't there. If it was just a robbery, why had she disappeared? At that moment, Han and Than returned to the house. Before they could enter, they were stopped. The crime scene was under investigation. It was very dangerous. Han nervously explained that she was also a victim, that she lived there and only wanted to see if Uyen had returned. Han tried to sound calm, but her eyes betrayed her bewilderment. She was invited in for questioning. In the small, makeshift room used for taking statements, Han sat opposite the investigating officer. Her hands were clasped tightly together. Her breathing was still rapid. She was asked to recount what happened that evening. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, the sky was darkening. The surrounding space was unusually quiet. A man appeared. He was about 1.6 meters tall, slightly overweight. His blonde hair was parted in a striking, unforgettable style. On his left hand was a small tattoo, like half a star. He had attacked Han and Uyen before. Han didn't know why. No money, no clear personal conflict. But the way he looked at Uyen was full of predatory intent. After the attack, Han never saw Uyen again. The house was subsequently left in ruins. When mentioning this detail, Han's voice choked up. She tried to remain calm, but fear still crept into every word. She was not only afraid for herself, but also for Uyen, her friend whose fate was unknown. Outside the house, the wind blew through the windows, creating a long, creaking sound, like a warning. While the police began following the lead, elsewhere, Uyen was still on the run. She huddled in a small corner, her eyes constantly darting around. Every step she took made her heart pound. She only had a few loose coins left in her pocket. She desperately counted each penny. If she didn't go to work, she would run out of money. But if she went out, what if she ran into him again? This internal struggle almost exhausted Uyen. She had thought she could endure it, but the feeling of being followed made her lose faith in the safety of any place. And then, her worst fear came true. The fat guy appeared. He lingered around the area she passed through. His gaze wasn't direct, but it was enough for her to feel she was being hunted. In a panic, Uyen rushed away and bumped into an older man. It was Uncle Chin. Uyen bowed her head and apologized repeatedly, her voice trembling. She confessed that she was being chased. Upon hearing this detail, Uncle Chin's expression changed. He recognized the story. He had seen this girl being chased by gangsters in Puo Khao before, and that blonde man wasn't a stranger. He was one of Mr. Chin's henchmen. Hearing this, Uyen was stunned. Mr. Chin, her stepfather. That name was like a knife cutting through her mind. Unpleasant memories flooded back, the coldness, the unexplained conflicts. And now, he might be behind it all. Uncle Chin offered to take her to temporary accommodation. He even wanted to help her report it to the police. But Uyen hesitated. She was afraid there were local acquaintances of her stepfather. She was afraid the news would leak out. She feared being dragged back to that house again. Loneliness enveloped the young woman. Meanwhile, in another city, the CEO had just completed a business trip. The solar power contract had been signed smoothly. Everything should have been good news. But he had a bad feeling. As soon as he received the news, he immediately flew back to Cantho. On the way back, he didn't say much. He just looked out the car window, his eyes heavy with sorrow. When he arrived, the first thing he saw was the window frame lying askew on the ground. Uyen had escaped through there. In that moment, he understood how frantically she must have fled. He had promised to protect her, but in the end, she still had to face everything alone. The evening wind blew through the empty house, carrying a terrifying silence. The CEO stood silently amidst the rubble, a mixture of anger and remorse welling up inside him. When he heard Hoang describe the blonde man, he suddenly remembered a name. One of Mr. Chin's men. If it was him, then this wasn't just a simple robbery. It was a calculated conspiracy. And if Uyen's stepfather was really behind it, then her escape had only just begun. As night fell, the atmosphere in the small village was no longer as peaceful as usual. The once deserted streets became heavy with the occasional flashes of patrol car lights. People closed their doors earlier. Whispers began to spread. Kidnapping, gangsters, police surveillance. In a dark corner near the crossroads, two figures stood close together, speaking in hushed tones. The blonde-haired man, short and slightly overweight, constantly glanced around. His eyes no longer held the aggression they once did, but instead showed clear tension. He gritted his teeth. "I've seen the local police patrolling around lately. It seems they're watching." The other man tried to appear calm, but his voice trembled slightly. "Don't worry. No one will report it. No one was around that day." But deep down, both knew the situation was far from simple. For the past few days, failing to capture Uyen had kept them awake at night. They hadn't received the money yet. The job wasn't done. But the police were involved. Fear began to creep into the blonde man's mind. He wasn't afraid of fighting, not afraid of being chased, but he was afraid of being betrayed, afraid of someone confessing, afraid of becoming the scapegoat. And in a car parked not far away, the police were watching his every move. They had identified him as the person directly involved in the kidnapping in Puakhao commune. But from the files and information they had gathered, they knew he wasn't the mastermind. Another name appeared in the report. Phuc, the coordinator, the payer, the mastermind behind it all. The incident was no longer a small-scale robbery. It was organized. And so, they weren't in a hurry. A plan was devised that very night. An officer decided to disguise himself and approach directly to test the reaction. He pretended to be drunk, staggering towards the blonde man. He slurred his words, asking for a cigarette. At that moment, the atmosphere froze. The blonde man looked at the stranger with suspicion. He knew everyone in this area. That face didn't belong here. His intuition told him something was wrong. Just a second later, He turned and ran. "Stop!" A shout echoed through the dark street. The chase began. The sound of hurried footsteps, heavy breathing, the screeching of shoes on the cement pavement. The blond man ran in panic. Only one thought occupied his mind: escape. But not everyone was as fast as him. His accomplice was intercepted in another direction. He was tackled to the ground. He was handcuffed under the blinding flashlight beam. He screamed, "I didn't do anything!" But his words were weak against the overwhelming evidence. Meanwhile, the blond man slipped into the narrow alleys and disappeared. When he learned his accomplices had been captured, he understood that things had spiraled out of control. He was no longer the hunter. He had become the hunted. Elsewhere, Uyen remained completely unaware of the recent chase. She sat in her small rented room, the weak yellow light illuminating her pale face. She didn't dare turn on the TV. She didn't dare turn up the volume on her phone. Every passing car made her jump. Her heart was filled with questions. Why did Mr. Chin do this? If he really was behind it, where did she go wrong? The feeling of being hunted by her own family hurt more than being chased by gangsters. Uyen didn't cry. She had cried enough. Now only exhaustion and a lingering emptiness remained. She thought of Uncle Chin's words. There is still law here. But would the law be quick enough to protect her before it was too late? Back to the CEO. He barely slept for several days. He constantly called Hoang, Tan, anyone who could help find Uyen. When he heard that a suspect had been arrested, he felt both relieved and more worried, because it proved that this wasn't an illusion. Not a misunderstanding. Someone really wanted to kidnap Uyen. And the mastermind, Fook, is still nowhere to be found. The CEO stood before the small house once more. The house was now silent behind the seal. He placed his hand on the wooden door frame, feeling the coldness spread to his skin. He wondered, if he had come home a day earlier, would things have been different? A feeling of self-reproach weighed heavily on him. But he understood he couldn't stop at regret. The noose was tightening. The police had a lead. The accomplice had been arrested. The blond man was on the run. And Fook, the mastermind, would sooner or later be revealed. That night, Phuoc Hao couldn't sleep. On one side, the police were silently watching. On the other, the fugitive was fleeing in panic. And in the middle of it all was a young girl trying to survive each day. The hunt wasn't over. On the contrary, it had only just entered its most dangerous phase. Because when the mastermind realizes his accomplices have been captured, he will act, and his sole target will still be Ly Tieu Uyen.